Colonel Faulkner was introducing me, said he was going to introduce me this morning. I got a little bit concerned, and then he mentioned Camp Happy Land. I almost passed out, but that's all right. I love you, brother. And, you never know what your ministry is going to do in the lives of people and how far out that ministry will reach. There was a day back in, I guess, the 1950s, 60s, somewhere thereabouts, that Commissioners Evans were the Corps officers in Wilson, North Carolina. And they had ministry with Earl and Lily Mae Woodard. And in a revival meeting one night, Earl came forward, and Commissioner Evans, as I understand, led Earl Woodard to Jesus. I would not be here today if you had not done that, Commissioner. Thank you. Your ministry has reached certainly around the world, but certainly into the heart and life of a young man who desperately needed Earl Woodard when he came to my home corps. Thank you for that. Now, there are those in the audience today who may find what I'm about to say somewhat interesting and maybe amusing, but Colonel Tom Jones had a huge impact on my life as a young, settle down now. He's deeper than you think. Had a huge impact on my life as a young lieutenant in a very difficult appointment. And I remember the first senior review I ever had in my life. Tom came to do the review, and when I got ready for the review, I filled out all the lines. It says, "What's wrong with your corps?" I listed it. What should I do? What should you do to improve your corps? Well, I felt I knew the corps pretty well, so I listed that too. And I remember Tom came and he looked at the papers and he drank his Coke and he looked at me and he said, "Well, Jim, the only thing you left for me to do is sign this thing." But Tom, you spoke into my life many, many, many times, and I appreciate that, brother. I really, really do, from the bottom of my heart. This morning, the scripture is read to you so wonderfully by Captain Shelley. This passage of scripture is something, usually when you hear a sermon preached on the 21st chapter of John, you know they're going to maybe read these first 14 verses and then rush right into 15 and forward. Well, I would say to you this morning that the first 14 are far more important than the last part of John chapter 21. Because you see, and I think, God, I love it when God just sort of brings things together, because I did not know that Jason was going to talk this morning and all that he's about and all that is taking place in what he's doing, which is a wonderful, wonderful work. But you see, the disciples who were there that day, that evening, their life was upside down. Everything they knew, everything they held dear had been ripped away from them. Jesus had tried to explain this to them, but somehow they didn't get it. I don't know about you, but I find myself in that boat far more times than I want to be. Jesus is trying to help me to see the way, but I have my sights set somewhere over here or somewhere down the road or somewhere else. And Jesus is patiently waiting for me to get it. So the disciples were in a state of depression, no doubt, because they had lost their leader. They had lost the one who they had spent the last 3 years of their lives with. They had seen him do great and mighty works. They had seen him do miracles. They had heard him teach. Peter himself was probably the most disturbed one of the bunch, because every time he woke up in the morning, I guarantee you Peter relived, "No, I don't know him. No, that's not me. No, I don't know him." Every time he opened his eyes, he remembered those words. And so Peter, doing what we all do ourselves, when we have troubles, when we have difficulties, we tend to go back to what is comfortable, don't we? We tend to find somewhere that feels good. we tend to find someone to hang out with that we can commiserate with at least. And so Peter announced to the other 6 there on the seashore that night, I'm going fishing. Well, the rest of them, thank God, had enough sense to go with him. So they climbed into the boat and they went to their favorite spot, because if you're a fisherman, you know that fishermen have their favorite spot. They have their favorite technique. I mean, I've been fishing with men who place the bait on the hook, they spit on it, they rub their left ear, and they wink their right eye, and then they say, ready to catch fish. And so I spit and rub and wink, and I catch nothing. So I am not a fisherman. If I want fish, I go to Long John Silver's or somewhere like that. Or Red Lobster. They got good fish there. But on that night, they went to the spot that they were used to going to. And they fished in the way they used to fish. Because after all, fishermen have to do everything the same way every time. Am I right? I mean, every fisherman I've ever been with. I went and did a revival for an officer. He was in Charleston, West Virginia, and did 2 revivals there. And then he was in Lake Charles, Louisiana, went and did 2 revivals there. And every morning, one day during the week, we had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go to his favorite fishing spot. Jim, we're going to catch so many fish, we'll have to rent a trailer to bring them home. And all of those times, we caught nothing. On one occasion, the fish were swimming around my hook and looking at me and saying, you think I'm dumb enough to bite that hook? I know what you're going to do. So I said, Sam, if you'll get me a big stick and a net, I can catch all those fish, because I'll beat them into submission and then scoop them out. So fishermen have their favorite way of doing things, and so that's where they found themselves, together, trying to get some comfort, some ease from the turmoil that was in their life. Is this beginning to sound somewhat personal and familiar? I hope so. Because if we're all honest with ourselves, this is where we live every day of our lives. Disappointments. As sure as you wake up in the morning, there will be disappointments. As sure as you wake up in the morning, there's going to be things that will not go your way. As sure as you wake up in the morning, there are going to be people who will say things to you you don't want them to say. It doesn't matter if you're retired or working every day. Somewhere, someone's going to rain on your parade. Most every day in some way or another. They'll pull out in front of you. They'll put your cart in front of you. They'll get there ahead of you and you miss the early bird special and, all of that stuff. It happens, doesn't it? It happens to all of us. And so that's where the disciples were that night, in a place that was familiar with people they were familiar with. And they're fishing, Me, I would have already come back home. But they're fishing. Early in the morning, verse 4 says, of John 21, early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. Many times in your life and in my life, Jesus is standing on the shore of our despair, of our pain, of our suffering. He's standing right there. And Satan, all Satan wants us to see and understand and feel and sense is the pain, the despair, the uncertainty. It will never get any better than this. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I've got to have some relief, and it goes on and on and on. And all along, Jesus is standing there saying, anytime now you can call out to me. Anytime now you can cast all your cares on me so that I can care for you. Anytime now you can come to me with all your burdens and cast them on me, because you see, I endured the cross. I died. I spent 3 days in the grave. I am no longer dead. I am fully alive, and I am here Because I am the great burden bearer. Because when I died and I went to the grave, I took your burdens with me. I took your cares with me. I took your heartaches with me. And then when my daddy showed up that morning and said, son, it's time to get up. When I rose up that morning, I rose up with more power than I went to sleep with. You understand what I'm saying? I rose up fully glorified. I rose up as only the Son of God, not inhibited by being the Son of Man as well. I rose up in all of God's glory. I rose up in all of God's power. I rose up in all of God's authority. And I'm waiting on you to cast your cares on me. But here we are fishing and figuring things out on our own and trying to fix things on our own. After all, we got a college degree, or we know how to do things. We run companies, we run this, we run that. After all, surely life's little bitty problems we should be able to figure out on our own. I don't know about you, but every time I try that routine, I get all messed up. And I find myself frustrated, fishing all night and catching nothing, trying to solve it on my own and getting deeper and deeper in trouble, further and further away from Christ. You see, as we try to fix things, we think we're pulling ourselves to Christ, but it's when we surrender everything to Christ that He comes to us. You see? We don't need to pull ourselves to Him. We need to surrender to Him, then He comes to us. He comes where we are. And so Jesus is standing on the seashore, and they don't even know He's there. And this voice in the darkness, in verse 5 says, He called out to them. He called them by their first name, friends. You see, Jesus had this discussion with them on another occasion, hadn't He? He said, I don't call you servants, I call you what? Friends. So He addressed them as He had always addressed them. Friends, haven't you any fish? I think this may be where the Spirit of God took a little levity to not record everything they said. Because I think they probably said a lot more than no. But no, they answered. And He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. Throw your net on the right side of the boat. Well, now that could have begun a great debate, because we're creatures of habits. We don't like change. We like doing the things the same way every time. We like how we get up, we like this, we like that. And during my time as a Corps officer, when a Corps council member or a soldier would say to me, Lieutenant, Captain, we've never done that before. That was like throwing a steak to a hound dog. Because we were going to do it that way, because they needed to do it different. And so they were smart enough to listen to someone they didn't know, and it became successful. Now, if we can follow someone that we don't know, we listen to TV preachers all the time, and TV radio preachers and this, that, and the other, and all of this jazz, and we go to seminars, and we soak up and soak in everything we can soak in from people we'll never know. Now, we know Beth Myers, that's a great name, but how many times has Beth Myers been to your house for lunch? Okay? Now, I'm not knocking Beth Myers. Please, ladies, just settle down. But I'm using that as an illustration. How many times has Beth Myers been to your house for lunch? Probably none. So do you really know her? But yet we'll follow her teachings exactly. But when the Spirit of God prompts our heart, we want to ask questions. If Beth Myers says it, we'll pretty well do it. But when the Spirit of God pricks our heart, we're going, now wait a minute, let's think about this, let's talk about this. Somehow we got it all backwards, don't we? And so because they listened to someone they didn't know and did something they had probably never done, fish off the right side of the boat, they were successful and things happened in their life. And they caught more fish than they'd ever caught before, according to the scriptures. Sometimes in our lives, there are things going on in our lives that cause us great discouragement and great distress. I was privileged to be the General Secretary of the National Capital of Virginia Division, not because I was the General Secretary, but because I was Executive Officer of the National Capital Band during the time that Bandmaster James Anderson was a bandmaster. In 2008, Bandmaster Anderson found out that he had cancer. And he and Christina came to my office and sat down one evening, and I'm thinking, why are you here in my office? But they poured their heart out to me. And his cancer was incurable. It was attached to every vital organ he had. And he preached at our family camp in August of 2009. And he said to us that night, he said, I'm somewhere between the celestial and the terrestrial. I've got one foot in heaven, I've got one foot on the earth. And when God decides to move the other foot to heaven, I'm ready. I'm ready. I learned so much from Bandmaster Anderson of how to live in the midst of difficulty, how to live in the midst of illness and despair. But I learned how to pray for people better. Because I was concerned that, how do you pray at that point? And I've never been comfortable with praying if it's your will. That's sort of like a safety net, you know what I mean? It's like, if it don't work, if it's your will, then I'm kind of safe here. But the Lord taught me how to pray the authority of God over people with Bandmaster Anderson. And I would simply pray the authority of God over him. And as you pray the authority of God over someone, it's out of your hands. God's going to do what God's going to do. It's not up to me. It's not up to you. He is in control. I am not. So as I pray God's authority over Bandmaster Anderson and over people that I know who just need God's touch in their lives, I find myself freed up to fish, freed up to be a fisherman. Now, the important part, I think, of this story and this account is they took off for shore, and they figured out it's the Lord. And Peter jumped into the water, as he always would, and ran to Jesus. And the other disciples followed, towing the net full of fish. Probably Peter didn't do too well on the cleanup crew either. But anyway, followed him, pulling the catch of fish. Now here it is in verse 9. Verse 9. When they landed, they saw a fire burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus, our Savior, did not go to a convenience store and buy bread and buy fish. I do not believe that Jesus, our Savior, called that fish and that fire and that bread into being, although he could have. After all, he was present when his Father called everything else into being, but I don't believe he did. I believe Jesus very lovingly and very tenderly prepared the fire, prepared the bread, prepared the fish, because he knew his disciples were going to come. He knew his disciples were going to come. Some of my greatest moments as a Salvation Army officer is to sit at commissioning and watch folks be commissioned as lieutenants in the Salvation Army who told me they would never, ever be a Salvation Army officer. I'm the kind of guy that I believe everyone between the age of about 13 and 50 just need to be Salvation Army officers. And I'm prone to ask everyone in that age group about being a Salvation Army officer. And I've been told off more times than I can count. And I said, I just have one question for you. If God calls you, will you go? And they say yes. I say, well, I'm done. My job is finished. God will call you. I'll sit at your commissioning, and we'll laugh about this later. Because God is in this calling business as far as officership is concerned. But you see, Jesus knew his disciples were out there. He knew they were hurting. He knew they were in trouble. And so he prepared the bread, the fish, for their coming. And in verse 10 is where the real action happens here in this story. Verse 10, Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you have just caught. Oh, my word. Do you get it? Do you get it? Do you get what he just said? Do you understand what Jesus just said? He said, bring your fish and place them with my fish, and they become our fish. Perhaps I need to fish more. Now, I have an analogy for the word fish here in this morning. Fervently, I seek holiness. You see, that's the holiness experience, isn't it? Right there. Jesus prepared everything they need to make the journey to holiness. He prepared it, the fire, the bread, the fish, knowing they would come, knowing their eyes would be open, knowing that things would change in their lives. And then he said, bring your fish. Now notice the scripture says that there was 153 fish, and it should have broken the nets, but it didn't break the nets. Now, what I hear and what I sense from that reading there this morning is that no matter how many burdens, no matter how many obstacles, no matter how many problems that are in our net this morning, we all have a net. We all have a net. We can choose to bring our net full of fish and place them with his fish and enjoy the blessing of holiness. Or we can choose to drag our net full of problems and discouragements and anguish and peril and broken promises and broken hearts and broken dreams and you name it. That's all in our net. But Jesus said to them, bring your fish and place them with my fish. And now they're our fish. That's the holiness of God, isn't it? When we bring everything we have to him, we bring all of our concerns. See, problem that many of us have with holiness is we're always trying to get close enough so that there's only a little bit left to give it all up. And I don't know about you, but that doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. The disciples drug that net full of fish, 153. And that's where Tom helped me greatly as a lieutenant. He was teaching a class on statistics. And he said, ladies and gentlemen, in the words of that British Salvation, no. He just said, ladies and gentlemen, every number on your statistical sheet represents one of God's chosen creations. For a young lieutenant, this hoo-ha-ha and battle of statistics went away. I understood that every person I touch is one of God's creations. In 1979, in a little town of Pulaski, Virginia, 19 was all I could have in Sunday school. Stand on my head, do whatever. And I said to then Captain Bill Crabson, my great DYS, I don't understand. And he said, Jim, it's very simple. God can only give you the number of people to minister to that you're spiritually fit to minister to. Whoa. Whoa. I have something to do with how many people show up at my building every Sunday. They're one of God's chosen creations, my DS had told me. And so for me, the passion for souls and doing anything I could to get them in the house was created through the ministry and the speaking of those two gentlemen. And so this morning, I wonder what's in your net. What are you dragging around with you today that doesn't need to be dragged around any longer? Jesus says, bring your fish. Bring everything in your net, and place them with my fish. Place them with all that I have. King of kings, Lord of lords, the great I am, the Prince of Peace, the mighty God, and on and on. Bring all your fish. Place them with my fish. And they become our fish. And we'll live holy lives together. Turn your eyes upon Jesus, the song says. Look full in his wonderful face. And the things of the earth, everything in your net, the things of the earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. I was a finance secretary for 13 years and loved every minute of it. I really did. And I saw a lot of things come to the finance board that I brought. We replaced cars and trucks, and computers and typewriters back in the day. Yeah, remember what, some of you don't even know what typewriters are. But anyway, we replaced all this equipment and stuff. But it always bothered me, and Don's heard me say this before, it always bothered me that I never got a requisition to replace the altar pads because they don't ever seem to wear out. You got to use something to wear it out. You know what I'm saying? Those computers, they wear out quick. Those cars, you get 110 miles. Well, if you buy a Toyota, you can go 240. Even a Dodge Caravan, I got 250,000 miles on a Dodge Caravan. I'm going for 300. But anyway, because I don't have any money. But you can bring all of that. Bring all of yourself. Bring all that you have, all that's holding you back. Bring it to the mercy seat this morning. This is a place where all you say by kneeling here is, I want to be more like Jesus. And this morning, we're going to ask all of those who would like to fish more. Fervently, I seek holiness. I need to fish more. How about you? I need to fish more. Fervently, I seek holiness. I invite you to stand as we sing that chorus this morning. I invite you to come as God's Spirit leads you this morning. Come and bring your net. Come and bring your fish. Place them with his fish and leave this place holy and on fire for him this morning. Come as we sing. Turn your